In this episode, we're going to be discussing free speech and what it is and what it is not, and why the far left is so terrified of it. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. By now, many of you are going to be aware of the incident in Utah involving Charlie Kirk and how he was prematurely taken from this earth by what can only be described as a violent ideologue. Now, as a person, a student of history, and as a person or a student of free speech, well, to be honest, I am a free speech absolutist. And I will define what that means once I talk a little bit about what I learned of Charlie Kirk or what I saw of Charlie Kirk. Now, I never met him. I don't know him. Though I did watch a lot of his content. I did watch as he sat in a chair under a tent and withstood abuse after abuse. I watched him as he sat there, and people came to the microphone and hurled names and all kinds of disparaging comments towards the person. And he would calmly talk to the person. He would invite dialogue, even though the person, all they wanted to do was rant and rave and scream. And I believe that we need to see that for what it is. This is a person who simply disagreed with much of the far left ideology. He just disagreed with the direction that many people that are well funded on the far left side of the aisle are trying to take the world in. He never called for anything. He never slammed his fists. He certainly exuded more patience than I would have. But that, I guess, is the problem, and that is kind of what leads us to this point. For though I don't believe we should be turning the other cheek, I don't believe that we should be, let's all calm down. Now that you understand that the fire has been lit, all of a sudden the people on the left, all these media outlets are all trying to call for calm and dialogue. Charlie Kirk's his whole persona, his entire online presence was simply rooted in dialogue. Of course, we don't see dialogue coming out of the far left, and I believe that we need to discuss that. That's exactly the point that we're going to be talking about. Now, many of you will know that I say that without freedom of speech, there is no freedom. Further, I say that freedom of speech is the right to talk truth to power, which of course is the epitome of disagreement. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with the individual or disagree. It simply means that you can share a dissenting opinion. Now, people on the far left, ideologues on the far left, they will wrap themselves in free speech when they want to tell you there's 955 genders, or that carbon is the problem, or any of a bunch of stuff that they want to talk about. And people on the right, respecting freedom of speech, saying, okay, you have the right to your opinion, but I don't agree with you. And of course, when we come back to Charlie Kirk, that was one of the main problems. He just simply didn't agree with much of the ideology on the far left. And there are a lot of people who don't agree with the ideology on the far left. Of course, the far left is well funded, and the far left has got much roots in with many of the technology companies. So the far left gets angry at people like Elon Musk because he allows for people on his platform to disagree with them. Other platforms will target specific groups, specific genders, for saying simply words that don't mesh with the ideology of specific groups and specific genders. You're all aware of that. You all know that. I think we need to look at the roots of the freedom of speech. And I believe that as a culture, we have to put the brakes on people who say, oh, you said something I don't like, so I want you banned from my platform. I want you banned from my school. I want you banned from my job. I want you punished for saying words that might have hurt my feelings. Now, of course, the thing is about feelings is they're never where you left them. They are always moving. They are always shifting, whether that be to a worse degree or a better degree. That's not relevant. What is relevant is that they cannot be trusted to hold any position. You cannot say to yourself, oh, that person said that, so now because it's my feelings, they're not entitled to say that. Of course, superseding your feelings over their own feelings, their feeling to express themselves, their feeling to let you inform you of their intention or their desires, or they're just plain old ordinary thoughts. Now, we can come and we can look around, but I'd like to begin at the beginning. Now, I could talk to you about the Magna Carta. I could talk to you about how there was rules put in the Magna Carta to allow for people, not me and you, of course, not normal, common people, but people to disagree with the king. But I think the best example of it, of course, is the United States. And everybody forgets that they overlook the idea that it's an amendment to the Constitution. It wasn't put in there originally. When the people who drafted the Constitution of the United States of America, they did so in 1776. The amendments to the Constitution were 1791, a full 15 years later. And they put 10 in. And they did so because if they weren't going to do that, the people on the ground, the average, ordinary, everyday, common person who had gone through that war, would have stuck to their state. They were going to be independent inside of their own state. They were going to have a Congress inside of their own state. And people thought they were going to bring them all together. And I could explain to you how that initiated the Second Amendment that the Americans cling to. But I won't cover that in this video. In this video, I want to talk to you about the importance and the significance of the First Amendment of the United States. It granted the uneducated person the right to say to the wealthy things they didn't agree with them. It permitted them to say things without these wealthy individuals, these landowners, these mercantiles, these shippers who were coming from England feeling that there was the system in England that they were going to pass on to the Americans, the system in Spain or the system in France. And these were common people who said, I am not putting up with that anymore. I didn't fight to throw the British Empire out of this country so that I have to now bow to you, so that you have the right to punish me because I say something to you that you don't agree with. Now, that was the first time on the face of the earth that happened. No other time, no other place. And it was so terrifying to many of the European countries that they cracked down on freedoms inside of their own countries. It led to all kinds of problems in France. But the freedom of speech is still trampled on in many countries of this earth, especially socialist far-left countries, where they want to tell you that it's not a good idea to say those words because it might go against what's best for the people. Of course, the words are the words of many of the people. It's just that it hurts the feelings of those at the top. And so we come back to it, the right to speak truth to power. People that are in charge need to hear what you have to say. And the only way that you can make progress on this earth is to have disagreement and have contention. And I believe that if you were to take the time to look at much of Charlie Kirk's content, you would hear him say that. You would hear him echo this sentiment. He did it with much more grace and poise than I did, of course. However, the feelings of freedom of speech are universal. We all want the right to tell our spouse exactly how we are feeling, our boss exactly how we are feeling. And we only hold back out of fear. We only hold back out of trepidation that somehow it's going to blow back on us, that they're going to take that power that they have and they're going to abuse that power and they are going to utilize that power to harm us in some way, which of course is how the far left silences any dissent. Because they have the far left governments well funded by various individuals who are billionaires, who buy up certain media outlets and take control of certain media outlets and multimedia platforms. And they target individuals who don't agree with their philosophy or people standing on the sidewalk, or people standing across the street. I mean, in Canada, there was a guy that, Billboard Chris, I think his name was. All he did was stand there with a billboard, but they went after him. There was a 16-year-old who did nothing but read the Bible out in front of a school. They went after him. Oh, they didn't care all of a sudden about what freedoms that this individual was trying to exercise. His freedom of expression doesn't count. His freedom of expression is targeted because the socialist government, the people in charge, feel that they have the right to target some people, but not the people on their side, not the people in their group. And of course, it wasn't that long ago when that group was the one who felt they were being targeted. The difference being, of course, is that nobody silenced that group. Nobody told that group that they weren't allowed to say that they feel there are so many of this, or that they want to fly this flag, or that they want to dress in any way, shape, or form, or do whatever it is, any of 25 things that I'm sure you can think of off the top of your head. Because people on the right, people in the Western world said, okay, you know what, I respect your right to say that, though I don't agree with you. Then that disagreement became punishable by these same platforms, by these same people of power. You see, people in authority who were driving this divisiveness so that they could benefit from it. And of course, we look around and we see the tatters and the remains of what used to be the freedom of speech. Of course, we need to understand that every passing second, the barometer, the bar slides a little bit further and further to the totalitarianism that was Iraq or Iran or any of a number of a dozen countries, any communist country that you can think of, any far left socialist country that you can think of, where they punish people for saying things that don't agree with the government, or where they punish people like in Great Britain right now, where they say we feel that this is XYZ, and Great Britain is, and they say it on Facebook, and Great Britain sends 15, 20 police officers to their door, or tackles them in the airport. We can see where the totalitarianism goes. We can see the results of this desire to try to silence people who don't agree with you. It wasn't that long ago before it would have been something else. It would have been, oh, I have the right to be attracted to my same sex. And then they would have said, oh, no, you're not allowed to do that. And there was a whole social justice movement based around that. Now those very same justice people feel that they have the right to target, whereas they were at one point not that long ago begging for the right to speak in safety. So we can see what happens when we allow these lines to be moved. We can see what happens when we don't keep those in power in check with our words, when we don't say to them, hey, what you're saying is inconsistent. What you're saying is wrong. And when we allow the powerful to push us around for not agreeing with them, we weaken all of us. They know that, or they wouldn't try to target us. And by us, I mean anyone who doesn't agree with them. Now, there are many things in this world that I don't agree with, and there are many things that I do agree with. However, I am there's no movement on freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is the only freedom that counts. Because the ability to disagree, the ability to tell people what you want, the ability to say, hey, that's not right, and I am not going to participate, is the only freedom that can keep us moving forward. It's the only one that allows for progress. People always say, well, how did the Americans do it? Well, I'll tell you one of the biggest reasons that how the Americans do it is because they allow for people to have discourse. And through that discourse, through that exchange of information, progress can be created. We look around and we see so much stagnation on this earth. And how many of those countries would punish people for not having the right to speak to the person above them, the class above them, or the caste system above them, or any of a number of examples that I'm sure you can think of. And if we don't say this is enough, then where does it end? It ends in places like Great Britain. It's supposed to be one of the largest monarchies on the face of the earth, cracking down on people because they said words on the internet that the police and the governor and the king and all of those people in charge didn't agree with. And rather than listen to the voice of the people, rather than respect freedom of speech, they decided that they were going to crack down because of a very few people's feelings. Of course, this is exactly the same thing that we see transpiring around us everywhere, every day. And as a culture, I understand that people are fed up with it. Now, I am not telling you, like some of these people that shoot off and go crazy, that you're allowed to call people names. That's not freedom of speech. I'm not saying to you that lying and dishonesty, or what the far left likes to call mis and disinformation, that's not covered under freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is the right to speak your mind. Lying, name calling, threatening, these are not things that are protected. These are not things that qualify. If you can't express yourself in a way that doesn't include those things, then what you really need to be focusing on is the ability to express yourself without including those things. I can't tell you how angry I am. I assure you, in the real world, I can use profanity with the best of them. But to be articulate, to make your point without utilizing those things is the secret. I mean, one of the funniest things people hear, one of the things that makes people laugh the loudest is when you hear a 2-year-old swear. And that may make you laugh. But the point I'm making is that profanity and name calling and all of these things, a child can do. It's those of us that can pull through all of that. It's the ability to articulate your message without having to revert to that kind of language. I can always tell from my comment section when the individual leans far left because they can't stop themselves from cursing and swearing, and then they're wondering why YouTube goes ahead and removes their comment. But sometimes I get them on the X platform as well. They just can't control themselves. They don't have the ability to articulate so they lash out. Like we see in the case of Utah, like we see in many of the churches that happened in the most recently. And in Canada, we can have a dozen examples. We can see where teachers are targeted, where parents are targeted by school boards, very few people thinking they can take control of so many lives, because they are the minority who feels that their feelings were hurt. And so their feelings count more than everybody else's. It's not an equal footing. They think because they are in a position, they are in a position of authority, that they can flex that authority, that they can turn their authority against anybody who doesn't agree with them. Which, of course, is exactly the thing that they claim they're going against. Without being held accountable for those actions, how can we ever hope to improve them? How can we ever hope for them to understand, to see the light? If we cannot stand and say, hey, we don't agree with you. I respect the fact that we don't agree with you, but do not try to abuse your authority on me, because I have the right to disagree with you, because that is the nature of the freedom of speech. That is the power of the freedom of speech. The ability to disagree with those in power and not be punished for it, and not be targeted or be the subject of an abuse. That's what freedom of speech is, whether that be the people on high in the TikTok or the platform of X, or whether that be your spouse, or whether that be your teacher, or whether that be the coworker. The ability to disagree with them and not be punished for it is what honor looks like, is what freedom of speech means. People that hear things and then wait later to lash out, to punish, to harm you, to go after you, not for the things that you did, but for the words that you said. These are not the people who are qualified to lead. I get that they are in a position of authority. I get that they are in positions of power. Of course, the only way to keep them in check is the ability to speak freely. Seems to me that when you speak freely, just words, it makes some ideologues go crazy. When you hear people like the NDP trying to say that you can't say that oil is good, or you hear people in the Liberal Party freak out because you might say something about carbon that they don't agree with, and they want to write laws for that. They want to punish you for that. They want to tell you that they have the right to silence you because they wrote legislation. Well, that legislation should be unconstitutional. That legislation is definitely unjust. The freedom to speak your mind is really the only freedom that all of us need. After that, anything else is secondary. Anything else. Of course, we can see in Canada many examples of our liberal and our far left ideologues becoming hostile, becoming angry, trying to censor people, trying to shut them down. I mean, we have entire laws written about how videos like mine go to get turned down in the algorithm because it might have hurt somebody's feelings in the halls of the House of Commons. We have laws where entire billion-dollar oil companies are not allowed to say things because some far left MP wrote a bill, put a bill in. That kind of thing is exactly where allowing freedom of speech to be eroded ends up. The idea that they feel that they can silence you because they don't agree with something you had to say. Well, they don't have that right. And of course, that's what Canadians need to be taking away from this tragedy in Utah. That's what we all need to be taking away, that it's enough. We've bent far enough. And though our Constitution was brought home, it was manufactured in 1867 and it was brought home in 1981, that does not mean there is not room for amendments. And I hear people out there saying, yeah, but we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, except for the fact, of course, that the first rule of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is that at any given time, they can invoke Article number 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which suspends, removes, and takes away all the rest of them. That's how they stopped the trucker convoy, by invoking Article 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Canadians need to have amendments made to our Constitution, amendments that allow us to have free speech, or amendments that allow us to have self-defense. Those are the kinds of things that we need to have, amendments that allow us to call for a recall election whenever we want. Now, I don't profess to understand how to make the wording, but I do understand that Canadians need to see it for what it is. We have to stop the creeping tyranny that comes from those who just are terrified of words that you say. Words that you say. All right, I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. You can let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments. I'll talk to you next time.